Welcome to those of you watching on YouTube. This is Blowing Smoke with Twisted Rico. I'm your host, Steve Riccardo. If you want to hear this entire show with intros, outros, and music, please go to Apple, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, or wherever else you listen to your podcasts. Please welcome to the show, Peter Prescott.
How you doing?
Great, Peter. You were actually born in Nantucket?
I was. That's yeah, I don't even know exactly how that happened. I think my dad might have been stationed there when he was in the Coast Guard, and then shortly after that we moved to Wareham, Massachusetts. So it was sort of a weird coincidence that I happened to be born there, but yeah, I was.
Wareham, that's like on the Cape?
It is. As they like to call themselves the gateway to the Cape.
Do you remember when you were young, when you started listening to music and what caught your ear? Or was there music playing in your family's house or
You know, my my parents were not that overtly musical in any way. Um, I hate to be boring, but I think it was like the Beatles on Ed Sullivan, I think that's really like people of my era, that tended to be the introduction. And then you saw like Shindig or whatever with Paul Revere and the Raiders and stuff like that a couple of years later. So yeah, oddly enough, like obviously the radio was influential, but the TV, when I actually could see a group standing there playing, that was the revelation. I think, I like singers and I like sort of single rock star types, but I've always been smitten by the idea of a group, a collection of
right?
people playing together. And when they play together, they make something bigger than they could ever, be alone. So yeah, I think it was the Beatles.
Did you start playing the drums at an early age? I mean, did Ringo have anything to do with that at all? Or
You know, Ringo didn't per se. I think I I was forced, like a lot of people were, to take piano lessons. So when you're forced to do anything, you don't you tend to see it as a debit, like a bad thing. So I tended not to learn music through piano. I tried the guitar. I didn't really have the affinity for that at the time, but like banging on stuff, that made perfect sense to me. So yeah, that was the instrument that I first really dedicated myself to.
how old were you when you were playing the drums?
Probably in any steady way, probably like 12, 13, somewhere in there.
Were you listening to a lot of music? Besides seeing the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show, were you buying records? I know you're a big record collector. That's
I
pretty well documented.
Yeah, you can probably see them back there. Um, I I started buying 45s. I think what I noticed whenever I heard something that didn't was at the bottom of the top 40, whether it was like Mountain, uh, Mississippi Queen, that
Yeah,
song. I remember
good
I
one.
bought that 45. I bought like T-Rex, Rider White Swan. If anything was sort of like a little too weird or a little too abrasive to be in the top 10, I probably wanted that 45. So that's what I started doing first, is buying 45s and listening to top 40 radio. Um, and around the time that FM, sort of replaced top 40 for, you know, stoners and weirdos, I gravitated toward FM. Um, which had like looser formats. It was more unusual. You might hear longer songs. So yeah, that's as the 70s went on, I was tilting toward FM radio, I suppose.
I grew up in Worcester County, so I grew up with WAAF. Was
Yep.
BCN? Could you hear BCN where you were, or did you listen to AAF?
No, I BCN. it was BCN, and whatever, at that time oldies radio would play the Blues Magoos and Hendrix and the Doors. So top 40 radio wasn't even that bad in the late 60s. It was actually pretty pumping. So
Yeah. When did you start? Did you start a band early on? Did you start playing in a band early on, or was it still at the Cape, or had you moved away from there by that point?
when I was on the Cape, there was three or four musicians that I stayed together with. We didn't do anything original. It was all like, Sabbath, Led Zeppelin, stuff in that area. And I think the first time I played original music, I saw an ad in the Boston Phoenix for a band. I can't remember how they described themselves, but it was like sci-fi rock or something like that. And I just took a flyer. I said, I don't care. I got to get out of this place. So I went and tried out for a group called the Malls, and the Malls did pretty weird shit. It was like just the beginning of the punk rock era in Boston, and these guys were on the outer edge of that. But that's sort of what I was looking for. So they I'm trying to think when that was. It was probably 77, I guess.
76 to 79, I think, was when the band, believe it or not, I know this. The Moles were
That's
around during that time. Yeah.
that sounds right. Um, because I was in that band when the Pistols record came out, and I remember we were all kind of amazed by that. Um, so yeah, that was the first time I played original music, and I just I don't think I ever turned. I don't think I ever went backward after that. It was, you know,
I know that there was a single, White Stains, I think was the name of it. From what I understand, that's pretty worth a few bucks these days.
yeah, yeah. That I think they ended up grouping some of the material together on an Italian album too, and that single I think was on it with some other demo type stuff. But um, yeah, that was another thing. It was a thrill to put out a 45. It was like, wow, this is sort of what real bands do.
Tristan Lozar was in that band also.
Correct. Yep, he was the bass player.
So was there anything between the Moles and Mission of Burma? Because I couldn't figure out if there was or not.
There was not. The Malls played with the band that Clint and Roger were in, which was called Moving Parts,
Yeah.
and a sort of a similar, like, almost punk rock filtered through prog rock or something. It was similar to the Malls that way. And I like the Moving Parts, but I love those guys. I said, like, when I heard that they broke up around the time I was booted from the Malls, I was bummed out about that, but then I said, wait a minute, I got to find those guys. And I somehow heard that Clint was working at a bar in Cambridge called Jack's. I
Hmm.
don't know if you remember that.
Yeah.
It was on Mass Ave.
It burnt.
Uh,
Did that place, was it that place that burnt down, or Jumpin' Jack Flash? One of those two burnt
I
down.
think Jumpin' Jack Flash burned
Yeah.
down. I
Okay.
think. Um, but yeah, I found him in there. I said, like, what are you guys doing? Are you playing? And he said, yeah, we're trying to get something going that's more sort of guitar heavy and like a more of a trio thing. And I said, like, I want to try out then. And they tried me out three times. I think it took three times before they said, okay, he's the guy. But I didn't care. Again, I sort of knew that I sort of knew I wanted to play with those two guys.
Did you
And
guys start playing gigs right away?
pretty fast. Yeah, they had material. They were some of which they had played in moving parts, but then Clint started writing, and Clint, as you know, had a bit more of a pop leaning. So
Yeah.
it was a nice balance between like Roger's Mad Scientist songs and Clint's that were a bit more on the anthem side. And right away I was like, this is a nice balance between these two. So yeah, it was pretty fast.
What do you remember about those early shows?
Um, I remember that people didn't really understand us, which wouldn't be the first time I was in a band that people didn't understand. But I think we also were sort of less concentrated, more noisy, and I think to be fair, I don't think we had quite gelled yet, but I think within a few months, I think it was starting to. I think we were playing it all better, and I think people started, relating to it.
Did
Um,
did those guys already know Rick Hart, or did you guys all meet Rick together?
I think we met him. Uh, I think we met him together. Um, and I was. He had put out the Inflictors single, and I don't think he had put out the Neighborhoods single yet. Um, but I was sort of surprised that he. It was very like Brian Epstein-y. Like he saw something in us that I don't think we even saw. You know, that he. Rick is like hugely into the British invasion era, and I think he found that a single by the Yardbirds or you know the Kinks was such an earth shattering thing that he kind of saw that something like that could be pulled out of whatever noise we were making.
Well, I mean, Academy Fight Song was one of the first songs you recorded, right?
Yeah, that and Max Ernst.
I mean, that's a pretty good start. I mean,
No, I was I was glad that he saw that because I think I'm not sure where we would have gone if we never ran into him, but let's put it this way, I'm glad we did because I think he solidified what was good, and that's what a great producer or engineer does, They pull the best out of you. And I think he was good at that.
it seemed like a lot happened in a short period of time because before you know it, I was actually at the Bradford Hotel show. That was the first time I saw the band. I saw you guys again years later, but
Yeah.
the first time because I was pretty young then. Um, did you, I mean, was this is mostly because Roger had hearing issues, right? That you guys didn't.
That was the main reason. You know, Clint had some substance abuse stuff. He went into rehab and dealt with that, and I think he's dealt with it in an amazing way ever since. I mean, that was so long ago. Um, but it wasn't it. Rogers thing was the main reason, but I think we kind of felt like, all right, we did a good thing here. Let's not beat it into the ground, which we proceeded to do 20 years later.
There was a story I had heard, and I can't remember who told me this, but is it true that you guys went to LA to play a gig and you checked out the room and you didn't like it and said, "We're not playing here," and you left? Is that a true story? I think it was Madame Wong's was the name of the club.
Uh I remember that place, but I'm not sure if we played it or not.
Yeah, I can't
You
remember. I
know,
heard it was, I knew I just came out of left field with that. I just
whenever
remembered
anybody tells me,
that.
is this story true? It probably is, whether I remember it or not.
As far as the Bradford goes, do you, what is your, I was at the matinee show, by the way, which was
Yeah,
absolutely insane.
yeah.
What is your recollection of that day? I mean, what did you think of all the chaos that was going on?
You know, I loved it, and in the year or two before, um, I think it's fair to say that we had been pretty affected by hardcore, and it was sort of, I mean, it was sort of nice to hear something eclipse us that was harder and faster and meaner and louder. Um, and I think we were affected by the speed. I know that we started playing all our material like twice as fast. I'm not, and I think it, it was the influence of that. And I think, that's why we had negative FX on that
Mhm.
bill. And, to us, it was a good, hang on just a sec, Steve. Hey, Lisa, how can I get these out of here?
I'm going to pause. Okay, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. So
You were talking about
I
negative FX playing
well,
the
there were a
show.
lot of mixed emotions, I think. We were happy to play shows that had such crazy chaos and energy, but we knew that was it. That was going to be it. So, there was some sadness mixed into the fact that like the gigs themselves were really crazy and fun. So, yeah, there was some mixed emotions.
Did you guys generally have a good relationship with the hardcore scene? Because the Boston hardcore scene around that time was like booming.
Thriving. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, well, I think that was mixed too, because I know that some of those kids saw us as way too weird and arty. And I think some of them saw us as the old wave. Um, which I couldn't blame them for that. I mean, in a way we were, we were the thing that came before. Um, on the other hand, I think some of them had respect for us because we were, pretty guitar driven, pretty frenetic. Um, so yeah, I think at the time, at least a few of those guys that were in bands, I think that they kind of saw us as an old thing at that point. Um, Again, well, which I kind of understand. When there's a new movement, you kind of want to kick the old one to the curb.
Yeah.
So
We're going to talk about the peer group in a few minutes, but I want you to help me settle this discussion. I know there was a show in May. I'm going to do this by bands rather than by chronological order
yeah,
because
yeah,
there's so much.
yep.
Um, I know there was a discussion about whether or not in May 2000, when Roger and Clint joined the peer group on stage, that it was planned and that was the beginning of an unofficial reformation of the band. Is that true or not? I mean, what's the story behind that?
No, it was yeah, I think that was coincidental. Like that, we always kept in touch. Um, we never had a bad breakup or anything. Um, so yeah, I think we were opening the peer group would open for Wire. I think that's what it was.
Yeah,
And
Wire.
and
Yeah.
yeah, those guys. I'm not sure if both of them did, but I know Roger did play trumpet or something. Um, yeah, I think it may have cracked the door open a little bit, but there was no intention from that to start playing. And frankly, we didn't think anybody gave a shit anyway. I remember like it's funny how sounds go in and out of style. Like toward the end of the 90s, I remember like post-punk bands in general were sort of at an all-time low in terms of people caring about that sound. And suddenly in the 2000s, there was this whole wave of young bands that were absolutely aping that sound. And that was just a coincidence that suddenly that sound came back into vogue. Again, that may have cracked the door further open because we said, well, people actually sort of liked the Gang of Four Killing joke, that kind of stuff. It's like they sort of liked this again. And so that was another thing that made it seem a little less ridiculous to actually play again. And when we did start playing again, there was no intention to continue. It was just like, we'll play a few shows and we'll be happy and people can get nostalgic, and then we'll crawl back into the age cave. And it didn't happen that way, which is pretty odd when I think back on it.
Yeah, you ended up releasing 4 albums. I saw another show. It was one of the best shows I ever saw. You guys played with the Neighborhoods at the Somerville Theater. What a phenomenal
Oh yeah,
night that
yeah,
was.
yeah. That
Uh,
was fun.
that was pretty close till around the time of Unsound, which ended
Yeah,
up being the fourth. And is there an official decision that the door's been closed on Mission of Burma? Because I heard that somewhere. Or do you think there'll ever be another Mission of Burma show?
I don't think so. I mean, one thing we're aware of here, and if you notice, like lots of reunion bands, they have a young rhythm section, and that's so. I mean, the Buzzcocks played at the Paradise, and I think they did the first two records in order, and it was incredible. But they had a rhythm section that was like half the age of Shelley and Steev, that made it work almost like the original band did. Um, with with us, I really don't play drums, and I haven't for maybe 6 or 7 years. Uh,
Wow.
so my my take on it is that we're all pretty comfortable as it is.
Yeah, it's
Uh,
a really good
we
story.
we beat that horse hard. So
Yeah. Yeah, you guys put out 4 great records, man.
thank you.
Well, the early ones too, obviously. I
Yeah.
love all the early stuff. Here's another person I'm bringing into the story early because I'm wondering if you're the one that Bob Weston. He joined the band on those 4 albums, but he was in Volcano Suns.
Yep.
Did you bring him into the mix, basically, or did you
Um,
guys all know him?
no, we all knew him, and around the same time that we restarted, he had recorded Clint's band Consonant,
Right.
and um, who put out two really beautiful records. And um, so you know, he had moved out to Chicago by that time, and he I think he had started playing with Steev, and they were doing shellac.
Shellac, yeah.
So yeah, I again, when I'm there's certain people that will always float around in my life, and I think Bob is one of them. And so it was a very natural thing. Martin Swope was not interested in any kind of a reunion, and Bob was fascinated by the idea of basically being Martin Swope, for the new century. Um, so yeah, it was a very natural thing.
And he was the house, he was the front of the house guy for you, right? On all those
Yes.
tours. So that
Yep.
made sense. Um, Briefly, Dreadful in the Den. You guys put one record out, and then I guess some material came out years later. Was that just a planned one-off type thing that you were doing? It ended up on Homestead, I mean, which where
Yep.
the leading into the Volcano Suns.
Well, a bunch of his stuff with Burma, with the Suns, and all the stuff he did since has all been reissued in the past couple of months.
Oh, it
Um,
has.
yeah, and they remastered everything. They got live stuff. They got studio outtakes. It's really extensive. I think the first thing Burma put out a single with Dreadful. Um, and then I think Burma played a few shows backing him up. When Burma broke up, the Suns were there, and he asked us, and we loved his stuff. So I think we might have played as his backup band along with Kenny from Moving Targets.
Yeah.
Um, and it might have been a year and a half, 2 years. Um, but yeah, that was just a really fun thing. It was a side thing, but it got kind of steady.
Yeah, it was right simultaneously around the time that Volcano Suns, because I know 85 was the year Bright Orange Years came out.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Gerard signed, Gerard, was he the one that signed you guys, or was it Sam
Yes. Yeah.
Gerard? Yeah,
Yep.
you ended up having a pretty long relationship with him in one way or the other over the years.
Man, I gotta call the guy my patron saint. I mean, he was really incredible in like always having an open ear to what I did, even when it wasn't very commercially viable. So yeah, I owe that guy most of my most of my career.
For you folks out there listening, Gerard Cosloy started at Homestead and ended up at Matador Records. And Volcano Suns, which we're going to talk about here, like a big chunk of your career, and the people that you worked with, Lou Giordano, Steve Albini, Sean Slade. Now, okay, I don't want to jump all over the place, but I'm kind of here. The Fort Apache stuff that you did, was that the old original Fort Apache?
It was, yeah. It was like in
Roxbury?
Yeah, Roxbury. I was going to say Mattapan, but it was in Roxbury. Yeah, I used to when we'd record there, I would ride my bike there and like ride home in the middle of the night. Um,
It
but
must have been fun.
yeah, it was kind of crazy sometimes. But yeah, all the people that the Sons worked with were pretty great. I mean, yeah, Lou especially like really made those first two records work, I thought. Yeah.
I had Greg from Riccardo on the show. We talked about Lou for a while because Lou was their sound guy for a while. Everyone
Yep.
seems to love Lou.
Yeah, everybody does. Yeah. In fact, a couple of years ago, he did a reunion record for the Proletariat. I don't
Yeah,
know if you've heard it, but it's amazing.
yeah.
Amazing. It just sounds like as good as any rock music can sound. So he's still cranking.
I forgot to mention earlier, I know the Proletariat played the nighttime show at the Bradford Hotel. I couldn't remember who the first show was Dangerous Birds open.
Yep.
Who opened the second show? I couldn't remember. It's okay.
Christmas,
That makes sense. You
I
guys
think.
really did a service to both sides of the aisle. You had the arty bands and you had the hardcore. You guys were good about that.
We loved both ends of that equation. I think we knew that both things were going to be around for a while, and we cared about both ends of that. So yep.
On Volcano Suns for a minute, I was listening to a bunch of that music this week, and White Elephant. My God, it's one of the best songs I think to come out in the 80s. I mean, what a
Thank you.
brilliant, brilliant job on that one. And then the Bumper Crop album, I thought, Bob came in on that. And I mean, all these records are really good. It's hard to like pick one out and say one's better than the other. I mean, when you
Appreciate it.
look at that period of your life, I mean, you feel like you accomplished everything you wanted to accomplish with that band.
Yeah, actually, I think um the I was actually the first Volcano Suns was with Stephen Mishner and Gary Wallach,
Yeah.
who went on to Big Dipper. Um, John Williams joined, those guys left. We got Jeff, and we made the first two records. Um, they they took off, and I hooked up with Bob and Chuck, who was in Sorry. So it just kept rolling along. I will say, I love the first two records, but my happiest moments in that band was with David Klyler and Bob. That was like the last 3 years, I think. I was playing with those guys, and we all got along great. When the last tour we did, I think we came to the end of it, and we were like, shook hands and said, "I guess that's it." And there was no tears, no recriminations, no sadness. It was like one of the most pleasant breakups that I ever had in a band. It was like, I will always have really warm feelings about that.
Yeah, and you ended it with Albini producing the last record. That was right around the time that he did Nirvana, right before Nirvana, actually.
It
Was
it
this,
was probably a couple of years
yeah,
before, but he was starting to record bands really fast, starting to do a lot of stuff there. So the fact that he did run into Nirvana at that point, if you look at all the indie rock that he had practiced on up till that point, it made sense that Nirvana said, "Yeah, get that guy."
yeah. I remember hearing somewhere that Albini put some show together, and you guys played with Cheap Trick.
Uh we ended up playing a festival in England called All Tomorrow's Parties. We did maybe 3 or 4 of them. And the first one we did, Shellac were the curators of it. And so, you know, Wire was on that bill, lots of Chicago stuff. And Shellac has always loved Cheap Trick. Albini in particular, like, adores Cheap Trick. And so we ended up playing just before them. It was
Wow.
like it was such an it was such an odd thing, but like I love Cheap Trick. Who doesn't love Cheap Trick, So yeah, so we actually did play just before them.
Was it their audience or your audience?
Uh it was more oddly enough, I think it was more our audience. Because I think some of the kids that were there, most of the bands were indie rock bands. So some of the kids were kind of like, who are these, 70s rock guys? But I didn't care. I loved them.
Okay, customized. There may have been a short break before customized, and did you take a little break there, or
In between the Volcano Suns and Customized, yeah, there was probably a year or two.
yeah, you did 3 albums, 2 singles on Matador. I know I had Kurt Davis on the show, and he played with you. I was wondering what I was going to ask you this question in general. Being the drummer that you are, it must have been hard for some of these other drummers to come in and play with you. I mean, do you have a specific thing that you were looking for? And did you tell
Um,
them how you wanted them to do it? Like
well,
Kurt, for example?
I no, I don't tell drummers how to play because that's stupid. I want any musician that I play with to do what they do. I don't want to like put constraints on
Yeah.
them. I don't want to tell them what to do or how to do it, whether it's drums or anything else. I always give suggestions, but I really like I try to stay away from that. The thing about customized is like two of those, Kurt and Ed, I worked with at Mystery Train. And I think we were listening to a lot of the same stuff at the time. We loved hanging out. And um, I think Customized was sort of the most regular rock and roll band I ever played with. Um, yeah, just for the novelty of it, I was sort of into like rock and roll, which I, you could argue that I never really played that, with some variation on that. But yeah, I think we just wanted like simple, direct, um, without being obvious. But I think we all were looking to play in a band like that, and we were hanging out a lot, so it was just natural.
And Matador was totally on board with that as well, right?
Yeah, I think because I was working at a record store, I was sort of getting into like rockabilly and surf and uh, all these sort of rock offshoots that I really didn't pay much attention to before. And I know that those guys like that kind of stuff too. So yeah, it was the most traditional rock and roll band I think I ever played with. And um, a really influential person in my life, Bob Moses, was the bass player. He's died since, and I miss him incredibly. But he was a great influence on Kustomized too. I think he was in the same spot. Everybody was just like, let's just play rock music and not like overthink it. So
And Customized seemed to like evolve into the peer group. Was that the case of what happened?
um sort of, but I was playing with different people, and I think you know, it wasn't, the peer group wasn't supposed to be as directly a rock and roll band. I think I was like seeping back into weirdness, and um there was a that was another band that like went, a bunch of people came and went. I mean, we were a four piece, a six piece, like um that was a fun thing. The one thing I'd say about the peer group is that it was the one band I've ever had that wasn't really represented well by a record. I think, we recorded stuff, but we never really put out an album. And by the time it got to the end of the peer group, it didn't sound anything like it did when it started. So yeah, that's the only thing I'll say about that, is like it evolved and changed so much that we never really got a sound.
It's a really interesting band to me for a number of reasons. There's more things about this band online than any band that you've been in. For a band that only had, I think, one song actually released,
I think you're right.
Nick
Yeah.
Blakely's blog spot is unbelievable. I don't know if you ever checked it out, but he has every gig, every set list, everything. And that's when I found out that you guys recorded all those demos with Pete Weiss. And then I found the unreleased New Alliance album. It made me actually call Nick Z last night because I
Huh.
needed to know what's the deal with this, because I found it on YouTube, and it's wild, man. Is there a reason why you guys never released it?
I, lack of focus, like a lot of bands, I think members came and went so fast that it never really developed a concrete identity. Um, a lot of the stuff I do like. Um, the one, the one thing there is toward the end of the peer group, we started playing songs that were longer and groovier and kind of had like a trancy quality about them. And that stuff I really liked. And that's kind of what I'm doing now.
Was that the last? Because Nick did mention to me you guys recorded on that 2-inch machine down there, and that was a famous machine. Was that the last time you recorded on tape? Because
No,
mini,
because the
oh
the
yeah,
Burma stuff we
oh
did
you,
after that, and that
oh
was
yeah,
on
yeah.
tape.
Okay,
Yeah.
sorry, yeah, yeah. Because I know that machine. I remember that machine at 1312 Boylston Street. That was a great room down there. It's too bad that building's gone.
Yeah. Well, we also recorded with God, I can't think of his name at the moment. He played in a band called Crack Torch.
Oh yeah,
And
yeah. It was Mark Sliker and Nick Z.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, I love Mark Schleicher. He recorded the last music we did, and I don't think Nick was in that edition of it. But that stuff was kind of neat too. So I mean, there was a lot of different interesting moments in that band. I think, again, I think why stuff didn't come out is like we never had a real long period of focus, steady, lineup. So yeah, I don't think any band I was in was a waste of time in any way, but that was just one that didn't come to fruition.
You
It
guys,
didn't.
you guys opened for a lot of cool bands. I was looking at the
We
list.
actually opened for the Damned.
Amazing.
I mean, that's bizarre. Yeah,
Wire, Shellac. I mean, and plus you
yep.
played gigs. I was looking at your schedule. It seemed like you didn't care if you played Jocks or the Linwood or the Kirkland. You guys did everything.
Yeah, it was a moment where I think clubs in Boston were always opening and closing, and I think we were just uh, a working band, so whatever came up, we would check it out.
Okay, so then Burma happened after that again, and then now we got Mini Beast. Mini Beast still active now.
Yes.
Um, I went back and checked out all that. The thing that I got out of the Mini Beast stuff, because I watch video and listen, is I want to get copies of both the gold and silver vinyl after hearing about how many did you guys press on those?
I think we always keep it. The bottom amount you can have done, I think, has been 300. So that's tended to be what we made of every record we put out.
So, Crowd Pleasure was the one song that I heard that really blew my mind, and I think I saw a video of it too. Um, what was your goal when you started that band? Was it more like just I'm just going to do this because the drums are real tribal sounding, and it's just really just instrument. I mean, I hate to. I guess I have to use the word instrumental. I don't know what other word to use. How would you describe it?
Well, that's that's a tough one. It is. I think, for example, when it comes to the instrumental thing, there are some songs that I say one word. There are some that I actually, this sort of a verse and a chorus. There's some that have only samples and no words. I think, this is like your old guy band in the sense that everything you might have wanted to do before that you thought was not commercial enough or too weird or too this or too that, we do whatever we want. And we play shows that look like they'll be fun. We try to strip it down um to the simplest equation. Now, it started by me making two solo records under that name, and I did them in this room that's behind
Don't
me.
look was a solo record
it,
originally.
it was, and Free Will was too. And Free Will actually sounded kind of cool, and I liked the vibe of it. And it's really getting into sort of like trancy rolling percussion things. And at one point I played with a drummer named Adam, who a guy from here, and a guy named Eric Bailey's on bass. That was the first version of Mini Beast that um sort of sounded like we do now, I guess. Um both those guys left, and I maybe 6 or 7 years ago, I hooked up with a drummer from Attleboro named Keith Seidel. And when Adam left, I think I started, putting out feelers. I was not optimistic that I would find somebody near my age that wanted to play this stuff. I was like, I'll look, but if it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. And within like 2 weeks, I ran into this guy and I said, okay, touchstones are like Public Image, Fela Kuti, and the Stooges. And he said, please let me come down. I want to play this. And so the second I started playing with Keith, I was like, this is what I'm looking for. Um, that's where it got more tribal. I think the songs got longer. Um, and that's when I started sort of like getting loops going and running around the club if I felt like it. And so that sort of we changed bass players maybe 4 years ago, and that's what the group has been since. Niels LeWhite plays bass, Keith Seidel plays drums, and I'm doing the other stuff.
And
And
you guys are in based out of Providence now, right?
yes, yeah.
How do you like it down there?
Um, I think my girlfriend and I were sort of to the end of our Boston experience, and we wanted to get a house. As you know, it's kind of hard to afford them up there, and it was a lot easier to afford them down here 12 years ago. So we got this amazing house. We practice in the basement. Um, Nice little yard. Basically, the kind of thing that we could never have in Boston. And as much as I loved Boston, and I really did, I was there like 35 years of my life. So it's a place I still love a lot. Um, this was kind of inevitable. I think to sort of have a nice living space, um, this was important. Now, I don't love everything about Providence, but that's okay. There's enough that I love about it that I think we're both happy here, and you know, it sort of became a living spot almost by default, because I didn't neither of us wanted to move to the West Coast, move to, Europe. We wanted to stick near where
Yeah.
we were. So and ironically, my girlfriend and I both grew up on the East Coast. Uh, she grew up in Fall River. I grew up in Wareham. So it's almost like, you get old and you start gravitating back to where you
Pretty
originated.
close. Providence is
Yeah,
pretty close to those places.
it is.
Okay, I got one more thing for you, and I'm going to let you go. You've been fantastic. Thank you. I know you're a big record collector because I can see all the records behind you, and I know you worked at a record store. Now, I just came up with this off the top of my head, but can you tell me like what the last five, I'll only say five records that you listened to were?
Um, Oddly enough, there is a punk rock record in there, and it's like kind of a straight one. The first Gen X album, I know I
Oh,
listened
yeah.
to. I uh One of them was a soundtrack from the 70s. Um, it's a French word. It's like the not the invasion. That's what it's called, and it's very bass and drummy. It kind of sounds a little like Mini Beast. It's very heavy on the bass and drums. Um, I think at least four of those records would not have been rock because especially when I'm doing stuff at home, I tend not to play indie rock or punk stuff. But then again, I'll get up in the morning and throw on Black Sabbath and Blue Oyster Cult too. So, it that's the great thing about having a wall full of records. Like you can walk over to it and pull something out and go, "Well, I haven't heard this for a couple of years. I should throw it on." So I would actively say that to have all these records for me, it's almost like having this open-ended library of music. You can pull out any kind of sound as long as you bought it, um, and listen to it. And I kind of like that's the way I like looking at music now. I don't want to put limits on it. If it gets me off, I'll listen to it.
That's great, man. Hey, thanks a lot, man, for coming on the show. I appreciate it, Peter.
Thank you, Steve.
All right.